here, okay? There's an interesting concept that the Torah has a tendency or a nature, a habit of utilizing refined words. You don't often find coarse words when you're flipping through the pages of the Talmud or the books of the Torah. And the classic example of this, and I'm sort of being overly dramatic with that, there's obviously a very refined language that's used right throughout the Torah, but one of the classic examples of the extent the Torah goes to use this refined language is in the story of the flood in Noah, where there's the instruction to bring the animals into the teva, into the ark, and there were pairs of 2 and 7. And when the Torah describes the pure animals, it says the pure animals, tahor, the Hebrew terminology for pure. But then when it wants to describe the impure animals, or the defiled animals, from a halachic perspective or a kosher perspective, the Torah sort of goes out of its way, not sort of, but it does, it goes out of its way to use a terminology, a language, and say, that is not pure, rather than saying, which is defiled, or which is, impure. And that's the classic example of the extent the Torah goes to use this refined, pure type of language. And the challenge with that is that in this week's parsha, when the Torah is describing leprosy and the various impurities that a person could encounter, which would represent itself as a skin disinfection, the Torah doesn't go to those lengths and say, which is not pure, and rather it uses that language, which is, I suppose, a less refined language of saying which is not pure. Tameh, the Hebrew terminology for tameh, and doesn't sort of go out of its way to utilize that more refined terminology. And the question is why? What's the difference? And the commentaries say something very interesting, and I think a very poignant message to today's day and age, and that is, whilst it's really important to utilize those refined words when reflecting on historical stories and things that have taken place in the past, that's the sort of tone and culture that the Torah wants to set. Let's use the very refined language. But when it comes to specific instruction, when it comes to giving very clear guidance on where things are at, and the right and wrong, and how a person should direct themselves moving forward, that's where it's really important for leadership and for those that are giving direction and guidance to use very clear and specific language, and to not beat around the bush and sort of be vague about it, but to use very clear and specific language. And I think there's a lesson to learn for all of us in various different situations and different leadership positions and relationships that we all have. When reflecting back and saying, telling a story and sharing something, absolutely use the most refined language that we can come up with. But when it comes to giving guidance and instruction, and guiding people through the various navigations of life, it's really important to be clear and to be specific. So Shabbat Shalom, and have a